Hi, everyone. Good morning. We are going to jump right into week 2 of our novel study of Holes by Louis Sekar. And I just want to quickly review what we talked about last week. I posted a picture of this to our class Facebook. Um, and this is what the story map looked like at the end of our video last week. So last week we read chapters 1 through 3, and we got introduced to some characters, a couple of places in our setting, a problem, and a big event. You should have already completed the activity sheets for chapters 1, 2, and 3. Those were just kind of a way for you to review, and some of you might have even written a summary over chapters 1, 2, and 3, which I am glad to see, and I'm loving what we're writing so far. So keep up the good work, guys. So last week when we read, we got introduced to the warden, who is kind of the runner of Camp Green Lake. They own it. We haven't learned much about them, if they're a boy or a girl. All we know is that they own and run Camp Green Lake, and we learned about their cabin that's in the shade of the 2 trees that are on Camp Green Lake. And they're the only ones that are allowed near that area is the warden. Then we learned about Stanley Yelnats the fourth. We said that IV means 4. And we talked about that Stanley Yelnats, spelled backwards, is Stanley Yelnats. And that's why his family never named their kid anything else, because they just like that about their name, that it can spell backwards and forwards. A word that is spelled the same backwards and forwards is called a palindrome. And like race car is another popular palindrome. If you write out the word race car, it is spelled the same both forwards and backwards. So let me show you what I mean here. I had to get my whiteboard. RACECAR, race car. And if you spell race car from back to front, you get RACE CAR. Pretty cool, huh? So Stanley Yelnats is another palindrome of a name, and that's why they never named their kid anything else. So we have Stanley's father, who's also named Stanley Yelnats, but he's the third. We learned just a little bit about Stanley's mother. Stanley's mother, so far, we've just found out about her that she thinks everything, all the bad luck that happens to the family is caused by their no good, pig stealing, dirty, rotten great great grandfather. That was a big thing that we heard a couple times in the last chapters that we read. But we haven't learned that much about her yet. We just they've mentioned her name a couple of times, and we have heard her make a couple of comments about the great great grandfather. And then we talked about Kissing Kate Barlow, who was a famous outlaw in the past. So we don't even know what year she was around. We just know that she was a female and she was an outlaw. And last week we talked about that an outlaw is somebody who robs others, takes things from others, and just kind of like a criminal. But back in the old days, they were criminals that would never get arrested, and they just kind of kept evading police and stuff like that, which made them an outlaw. They were wanted all over this country, wanted posters, stuff like that. Okay. So that was kind of where we left off last week in terms of our characters. Setting, we got introduced to Camp Green Lake. Is it green? Is it a lake? No. It is a camp, and we have not even found out yet what makes it a camp. We're hopefully going to find that out in our reading today, but we have not even found out what makes it a camp or what the kids do at camp. We did find out that it is an option for kids who get arrested. So that was Stanley's problem. He got arrested and he gets to go to Camp Green Lake. He chose to go to Camp Green Lake instead of going to jail for the crime that he was arrested for. So we know that it is an alternative to jail, but we're not sure what makes it a camp, what they have to do there. We haven't figured that out yet. And then we also found out that Camp Green Lake is in Texas, which is a state here in our country. So this story does take place in the United States. So I'm actually going to use my orange marker since we're on section 2. I'm just changing colors to add to our story map. And I'm going to add USA to our setting because Texas is in the United States. All right. So we're ready to begin the next section. Today we're going to read chapters 4 through 6. Your activity sheet will be located directly below the video, and then you can also answer the question at the bottom too, and we'll talk about that at the end. So today we're going to pick up where we left off, like I said, chapter 4. Oh, and also another quick thing that I forgot to say, when we last left Stanley, he was on the bus. They had arrived at Camp Green Lake, and the last thing he said was that there was no lake and nothing was green. So he is just now getting to Camp Green Lake. He's about to get off the bus. So let's see what happens next. Stanley felt somewhat dazed. Do we know what dazed means? Let's stop right there. Let's think about what dazed could mean. Remember, as a good reader, we're always using our clues to figure out new meanings of words. So dazed often means confused. He's not really sure what's going on. Sometimes people will say, oh, you're in a daze. You're kind of sleepy. You're not really there consciously. You're kind of zoned out, thinking about something else. So that's putting that, any of those terms, is a good definition for dazed. Confused, out of it, in his own world. He's zoned out. He's not really present in that moment. Stanley felt somewhat dazed as the guard unlocked his handcuffs and led him off the bus. He'd been on the bus for over 8 hours. That's longer than we're in school. It's a long day on the bus. Be careful, the bus driver said as Stanley walked down the steps. And we also talked about, last week, we did mention the bus driver, but we kind of talked about if we don't think that they really add anything to the story, they don't even have a name, they're just kind of a character that was put in there to serve that specific purpose, like drive the bus, then we don't need to put them in our character story map. If you would like to, you can, but they're not going to be considered a main character, so we don't want to take up space in our story map for somebody that just is in a couple of the chapters. We want to save this space for our big top characters, the ones that are through the majority of the book, the ones that have a big impact on the other characters. So the bus driver probably is not somebody that we would want to include in our story map. Stanley wasn't sure if the bus driver meant for him to be careful going down the steps or if he was telling him to be careful at Camp Green Lake. Thanks for the ride, he said. His mouth was dry and his throat hurt. He stepped onto the hard, dry dirt. There was a band of sweat around his wrist where the handcuffs had been. The land was barren and desolate. So let's take a look at some of those words. Barren, desolate, dry, hard dirt. Okay, that gives us some very good descriptors of Camp Green Lake. So I'm just going to add those next to it here. Dry, barren. Okay, so anything like that can be put as a descriptor of our setting that just gives us more of an idea of how harsh of an environment Camp Green Lake is. The land was barren and desolate. Last week, we also talked about it being vast, widespread of nothing. No trees, no buildings, no streets. Very barren means nothing is there. It's bare. And then desolate, kind of out in the middle of nowhere, abandoned. Those are all words that would be synonyms for dry and barren. He could see a few rundown buildings and some tents. Farther away, there was a cabin beneath 2 tall trees. Remember we talked, that's the warden's cabin. Those were the only 2 trees and the only plant life that Stanley could see. There weren't even any weeds. The guard led Stanley to a small building. A sign on front said, "You are entering Camp Green Lake Juvenile Correctional Facility." The word juvenile means kids. And again, we talked about Camp Green Lake is another option than jail. So the kids that are at Camp Green Lake are kids that have gotten in trouble and were given the option to go to jail or go to Camp Green Lake. So correctional it's sort of supposed to be like a jail type option because they are trying to correct or get the children to feel guilty or feel like repentance for their actions, whatever they did wrong. They kind of like when you got sent to timeout as a little kid and you had to think about what you did wrong. That's what they're hoping happens at Camp Green Lake. So just kind of keep that in mind as the story is building of what kind of environment they are creating. Next to it was another sign which declared that it was a violation of the Texas Penal Code to bring guns, explosives, weapons, drugs, or alcohol onto the premises. As Stanley read the sign, he couldn't think, well, duh. The guard led Stanley into the building where he felt the welcome relief of air conditioning. After that hot bus ride, he's finally in the air conditioning, and he's in a building, which is one of the only few buildings on the whole grounds. A man was sitting with his feet up on a desk. He turned his head when Stanley and the guard entered, but otherwise didn't move. Even though he was inside, he wore sunglasses and a cowboy hat. He also held a can of soda, and the sight of it made Stanley even more aware of his own thirst. He waited while the bus guard gave the man some papers to sign. "That's a lot of sunflower seeds," the bus guard said. Stanley noticed a burlap sack filled with sunflower seeds on the floor next to the desk. "I quit smoking last month," said the man in the cowboy hat. He had a tattoo of a rattlesnake on his arm, and as he signed his name, the snake's rattle began to wiggle. So imagine he's signing his name, and this tattoo on his arm is wiggling as he's signing his name. So as we read, make sure you're picturing all these little details about these characters. "I used to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day, but now I eat a sack of these every week." The guard just laughed. There must have been a small refrigerator behind his desk because the man in the cowboy hat produced 2 more cans of soda. For a second, Stanley hoped that one might be for him, but the man gave one to the guard and said the other was for the bus driver. 9 hours here and now 9 hours back, the guard grumbled. What a day. Stanley thought about the long, miserable bus ride and felt a little sorry for the guard and the bus driver. The man in the cowboy hat just spit his sunflower seed shells into the wastepaper basket. Then he walked around the desk to Stanley. "My name is Mr. Sir," he said. "Whenever you speak to me, you must call me by my name. Is that clear?" So, a new character, Mr. Sir. That's his name. And we heard a lot of great descriptors about Mr. Sir. Wears a cowboy hat, wears sunglasses, has a snake tattoo, like sunflower seeds, quit smoking. That could maybe give you an idea of the sound of his voice. It's going to be kind of gravelly from all the cigarettes that he used to smoke. And he's a man, right? So think about, his name is Mr. So think about all of those things when you're doing your activity sheets. And as we get into our activity at the end of our reading today, to use in when you characterize these people and think of them. Stanley hesitated. Yes, Mr. Sir, he said, though he couldn't imagine that was really the man's name. "You're not in the Girl Scouts anymore," Mr. Sir said. Stanley had to remove his clothes in front of Mr. Sir, who made sure he wasn't hiding anything. He was then given 2 sets of clothes and a towel. Each consisted of a long-sleeve orange jumpsuit, an orange t-shirt, and yellow socks. Stanley wasn't sure if the socks had been yellow originally. He was also given white sneakers, an orange cap, and a canteen made of heavy plastic, which unfortunately was empty. The cap had a piece of cloth sewn on the back of it for neck protection. So he was just given his clothes for camp. He was given 2 orange jumpsuits, which are full body, long sleeved and pants, 2 t-shirts, and 2 pairs of socks. And then he was given a hat and a canteen, which is like a water bottle. Stanley got dressed. The clothes smelled like soap. Mr. Sir told him he should wear one set to work in and one set for relaxation. Laundry was done every 3 days. On that day, his work clothes would be washed. Then the other set would become his work clothes, and he would get clean clothes to wear while resting. You are going to dig one hole each day, including Saturdays and Sundays. Each hole must be 5 feet deep and 5 feet across in every direction. Your shovel is your measuring stick. Breakfast is served at 4:30. Stanley must have looked surprised because Mr. Sir went on to explain that they started early to avoid the hottest part of the day. No one is going to babysit you, he added. The longer it takes you to dig, the longer you will be out in the sun. If you dig up anything interesting, you are to report it to me or any other counselor. When you finish, the rest of the day is yours. Stanley nodded to show he understood. So why is the book called Holes? Because that's what they do at Camp Green Lake. They dig holes. The holes have to be 5 feet. That's a little bit shorter than me, across and up and down. And they're going to use their shovel as their measuring stick. So they have to hold their shovel out across their hole, and then they have to stand their shovel up, and it has to be as tall and as long as their shovel every day, every single day. So that's what they're going to do. And you can see on the cover of the book, you can see the shovel and some of the holes. So it gave us the visual even there on the cover. This isn't a Girl Scout camp, said Mr. Sir. He checked Stanley's backpack and allowed him to keep it. Then he led Stanley outside into the blazing heat. Take a good look around you, Sir said. What do you see? Stanley looked out across the vast, there's that word again, vast, wasteland. The air seemed thick with heat and dirt. Not much, he said, then hastily added, Mr. Sir. Mr. Sir laughed. You see any guard towers? No. How about an electric fence? No, Mr. Sir. There's no fence at all, is there? No, Mr. Sir. You want to run away? Mr. Sir asked him. Stanley looked back at him, unsure what he meant. If you want to run away, go ahead. Start running. I'm not going to stop you. Stanley didn't know what kind of game Mr. Sir was playing. I see you're looking at my gun. Don't worry. I'm not going to shoot you. He tapped his holster. This is for yellow-spotted lizards. I wouldn't waste a bullet on you. We also talked about last week in our first section, they said that if you got stung by a scorpion or bit by a snake, that was nothing, you'd probably live most of the time. But if you got bitten by a yellow-spotted lizard, you will die. So that is one of the things that they have at Camp Green Lake are yellow-spotted lizards. And if you get bit by one, it is a slow, painful death, according to the book. Okay? I'm not going to run away, Stanley said. Good thinking, said Mr. Sir. Nobody runs away from here. We don't need a fence. Know why? Because we've got the only water for 100 miles. You want to run away? You'll be a buzzard food in 3 days. Stanley could see some kids dressed in orange and carrying shovels dragging themselves towards the tents. You thirsty? Asked Mr. Sir. Yes, Mr. Sir. Well, you better get used to it. You're going to be thirsty for the next 18 months. So that's a long time to be at Camp Green Lake, right? That is 18 months. That's a year and a half. That brings us to chapter 5. We haven't learned much else new yet. No new problems. Really like problems that affect the characters directly, unless you want to, I guess we could say that a problem would be no water for a long time, so you can't run away. So the problem would be stuck at Camp Green Lake for 18 months and no water anywhere else. No use running away. Okay, so we're going to go ahead into chapter 5. And we are going to read chapters 5 and 6. I know this is a little bit longer than last week's video, but these chapters are just a little bit longer. So just hang in there. If you need to pause the video at any time, go ahead, take a break, and then come back. You can pause it after every chapter and do the activity sheet, or you can watch the whole thing through, pause it when you need to, get a snack, get a drink, and just hang in there with me, guys. Okay, we have 2 chapters left. Chapter 5. There were 6 large gray tents, and each one had black letters on it, A, B, C, D, E, or F. The first 5 tents were for the campers. The counselors slept in F. Okay, so tents A, B, C, D, and E were for the campers. That sounds like a setting to me. So we're just going to put the tents A through E. Stanley was assigned to D tent. And then I'm just going to put a little Stanley's tent D. So now we've got all the tents and then Stanley's tent as another one of our settings. Stanley was assigned to D tent. Mr. Pendanski was his counselor. Mr. Penn, P-N, Dan, D-A-N, Ski, S-K-I. And he is Stanley's counselor. He is definitely going to be a big character. The fact that we get his name and what he does, he's probably going to be in the majority of the book. My name is easy to remember, said Mr. Pendanski as he shook hands with Stanley just outside the tent. 3 easy words. Pendanski. Mr. Sir returned to the office. Mr. Pendanski was younger than Mr. Sir and not nearly as scary looking. Here we go. It's going to tell us what he looks like. It's going to give us some descriptors, so make sure you listen and write these down if you need to. You can put them under his name in your story map, or you can start a separate notebook piece with all the characters, however you want to do it. He was younger than Mr. Sir, not nearly as scary looking. Top of his head was shaved so close it was almost bald, but his face was covered in thick, curly black beard. His nose was badly sunburned. Mr. Sir isn't really so bad, said Mr. Pendanski. He's just been in a bad mood ever since he quit smoking. The person you've got to worry about is the warden. There's really only one rule at Camp Grin Lake. Don't upset the warden. Stanley nodded as if he understood. I just want you to know, Stanley, that I respect you, Mr. Pendanski said. I understand you've made some bad mistakes in your life. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But everyone makes mistakes. You may have done some bad things, but that doesn't mean you're a bad kid. Stanley nodded. It seemed pointless to try and tell his counselor that he was innocent. He figured that everyone probably said that. He didn't want Mr. Pendanski to think he had a bad attitude. I'm going to show you why I separated that. If you look, he has it broken down into Pendanski. I'm going to help you turn your life around, said his counselor, but you're going to have to help. Can I count on your help? Yes, sir, Stanley said. Good, and patted Stanley on the back. 2 boys, each carrying a shovel, were coming across the compound. Mr. Pendanski called to them. Rex, Alan, I want you to come say hello to Stanley. He's the newest member of our team. The boys glanced wearily at Stanley. Wearily just kind of means like unamused, tired, bored. They were dripping with sweat, and their faces were so dirty that it took Stanley a moment to notice that one kid was white and another was black. What happened to Barf Bag? Asked the black kid. Lewis is still in the hospital, said Mr. Pendanski. He won't be returning. He told the boys to come shake Stanley's hand and introduce themselves, like gentlemen. Hi, the white kid grunted. That's Alan, said Mr. Pendanski. My name's not Alan, the boy said. It's Squid, and that's X-ray. Squid, X-ray. Campers in D. So right away, what's something that we notice about the characters? Right, they don't go by their given names. They're all going by these nicknames. So we're going to have to wait and see what Stanley's nickname is. And maybe we'll find out why they have their certain nicknames. But Squid and X-Ray, if you want to put their regular names, Rex is X-ray, and then Alan is Squid. So it's up to you. They're going to go by their nicknames for the majority of the book. So if that's easier, probably, and then you can characterize them in your head that way, or you can use their given names. Hey, said X-ray. He smiled and shook Stanley's hand. He wore glasses, but they were so dirty that Stanley wondered how he could even see out of them. Mr. Podansky told Alan to go to the rec hall and bring the other boys to meet Stanley. Then he led them inside the tent. There were 7 cots, each one less than 2 feet from the next one to it. Which was Lewis's cot? Mr. Podansky said. Barfbag slept over here, said X-ray, kicking at one of the beds. All right, Stanley, that'll be yours, said Mr. Podansky. How would you feel if you got to this new place, you're a new kid, and then they told you that you had to sleep on the same bed that a kid named Barfbag slept in? How do you think Stanley is feeling about that? Stanley looked at the cot and nodded. He wasn't particularly thrilled about sleeping in the same cot that had been used by somebody named Barfbag. 7 crates were stacked into piles at one side of the tent. The open end of the crates faced outward. Stanley put his backpack, change of clothes, and towel in what used to be Barfbag's crate. It was at the bottom of the stack that had 3 in it. Squid returned with 4 other boys. The first 3 were introduced by Mr. Podansky as Jose, Theodore, and Ricky. They called themselves Magnet, Armpit, and Zigzag. So we have to extend it down here a little bit. So we have Jose, Magnet, Theodore, who goes by Armpit, and Ricky, who goes by Zigzag. So add those 3 characters to your story map. You can see that mine is kind of extending. So here in a minute, I'm probably going to have to switch to the back and just keep track of it, or on a separate piece of paper over here just to attach. Okay. They all have nicknames, explained Mr. Podansky. However, I prefer to use the names their parents gave them, the names that society will recognize them by when they return to become useful and hardworking members of society. It ain't just a nickname, X-ray told Mr. Podansky. He tapped the rim of his glasses. I can see inside you, Mom. You've got a big fat heart. The last boy either didn't have a real name or else he didn't have a nickname. Both Mr. Podansky and X-ray called him Zero. So we don't know Zero's real name yet. All they know is his nickname. You know why his name's Zero? Asked Mr. Podansky. Because there's nothing inside his head. He smiled and playfully shook Zero's shoulder. Zero said nothing. That's Mom, a boy said. So who is Mom? They keep saying, oh, Mom, oh, Mom. Who do you think they're calling Mom? The counselor, Mr. Podansky. So his nickname is Mom. Mr. Podansky smiled at him. If it makes you feel better to call me Mom, Theodore, go ahead and call me Mom. He turned to Stanley. If you have questions, Theodore will help you. You got that, Theodore? I'm depending on you. Theodore spit a thin line of saliva between his teeth, causing some of the other boys to complain about the need to keep their home sanitary. You were all new here once, said Mr. Podansky, and you all know what it feels like. I'm counting on every one of you to help Stanley. Stanley looked at the ground. Mr. Podansky left the tent, and soon the other boys began to file out as well, taking their towels and change of clothes with them. Stanley was relieved to be left alone, but he was so thirsty he felt as if he would die if he didn't get something to drink. Hey, Theodore, he said, do you know where I can fill my canteen? Theodore whirled and grabbed Stanley by his collar. My name's not Theodore, he said. It's Armpit, and threw Stanley to the ground. Stanley stared up at him, terrified. There's a water spigot on the wall of the shower stall. Thanks, Armpit, said Stanley. As he watched the boy turn and walk away, he couldn't for the life of him figure out why anyone would want to be called Armpit. In a way, it made him feel a little better about having to sleep in a cot that had been used by somebody named Barfbag. Maybe it was a term of respect. So we're on chapter 6. Again, pause the video as often as you need to. Take a break if you want to stop it here for the day and chill and watch the rest tomorrow. Fine. We do have one chapter left of our section today, and this one is the shortest chapter that I've read so far. So just hang in with me, and then we'll talk about your activity for the week. Chapter 6. Stanley took a shower, if you could call it that, ate dinner, if you could call it that, and went to bed, if you could call his smelly and scratchy cot a bed. Because of the scarcity of water, each camper was only allowed a 4-minute shower. Could you imagine a 4-minute shower? That's barely enough time to get the water turned on. It took Stanley nearly that long to get used to the cold water. There was no knob for hot water. He kept stepping into, then jumping back from the spray until the water shut off automatically. He never managed to use his bar of soap, which was just as well because he wouldn't have had time to rinse off the suds. Dinner was some kind of stewed meat and vegetables. The meat was brown and the vegetables had once been green. Everything tasted pretty much the same. He ate it all and used his slice of white bread to mop up the juice. Stanley had never been one to leave food on his plate, no matter how it tasted. "What'd you do?" one of the campers asked him. At first, Stanley didn't know what he meant. "They sent you here for a reason." "Oh, I stole a pair of sneakers." The other boys thought this was funny. Stanley wasn't sure why. Maybe because their crimes were a lot worse than taking shoes. "From a store, or when they were on someone's feet?" asked Squid. Neither. They belonged to Clyde Livingston." Nobody believed him. "Sweet feet?" said X-Ray. "Yeah, right." "No way," said Squid. So there's another character. I'm going to put him up here just with a little dot. Clyde Livingston, who is called Sweet Feet. Now, as Stanley lay on his cot, he thought it was kind of funny in a way. Nobody had believed him when he said he was innocent. Now, when he said he stole them, nobody believed him either. Clyde Sweet Feet Livingston was a famous baseball player. He'd led the American League in stolen bases over the last 3 years. He was the only player in history to ever hit 4 triples in one game. Stanley had a poster of him hanging on the wall of his bedroom. He used to have the poster anyway. He didn't know where it was now. It had been taken by the police and was used as evidence of his guilt in the courtroom. Clyde Livingston also came to court. In spite of everything, when Stanley found out that Sweet Feet was going to be there, he was actually excited about the prospect of meeting his hero. Clyde Livingston testified that they were his sneakers and that he had donated them to help raise money for the homeless shelter. He said he couldn't imagine what kind of horrible person would steal from homeless children. That was the worst part for Stanley. His hero thought he was a no-good, dirty, rotten thief. As Stanley tried to turn over on his cot, he was afraid it was going to collapse under all his weight. He barely fit in it. When he finally managed to roll over onto his stomach, the smell was so bad that he had to turn over again and try sleeping on his back. The cot smelled like sour milk. Though it was night, the air was still very warm. Armpit was snoring 2 cots away. Back at school, a bully named Derek Dunn was used to torment Stanley. The teachers never took Stanley's complaint seriously because Derek was so much smaller than Stanley. Some teachers even seemed to find it amusing that a little kid like Derek could pick on somebody as big as Stanley. On the day Stanley was arrested, Derek had taken Stanley's notebook and after a long game of come and get it, finally dropped it in the toilet in the boys' restroom. By the time Stanley received it, he had missed his bus and had to walk home. It was while he was walking home carrying his wet notebook with the prospect of having to copy the ruined pages that the sneakers fell from the sky. "I was walking home and the sneakers fell from the sky," he had told the judge. "One hit me on the head." It had hurt too. They hadn't exactly fallen from the sky. He had just walked out from under a freeway overpass when the shoe hit him on the head. Stanley took it as some kind of sign. His father had been trying to figure out a way to recycle old sneakers, and suddenly a pair fell on top of him, seemingly out of nowhere, like a gift from God. Naturally, he had no way of knowing they belonged to Clyde Livingston. In fact, the shoes were anything but sweet. Whoever had worn them had a bad case of foot odor. Stanley couldn't help but think that there was something special about the shoes, that they would somehow provide the key to his father's invention. It was too much of a coincidence to be a mere accident. Stanley had felt like he was holding Destiny's shoes. He ran. Thinking back now, he wasn't sure why he ran. Maybe he was in a hurry to bring the shoes to his father, or maybe he was trying to run from his miserable and humiliating day at school. A patrol car pulled up alongside him, and a policeman asked him why he was running. Then he took the shoes and made a call on his radio. Shortly thereafter, Stanley was arrested. It turned out that the sneakers had been stolen from a display at the homeless shelter. That evening, rich people were going to come to the shelter and pay $100 to eat the food that the poor people ate every day for free. Clyde Livingston, who had once lived at the shelter when he was younger, was going to speak and sign autographs. His shoes would be auctioned, and it was expected that they would sell for over $5,000. All the money would go to help the homeless. Because of the baseball schedule, Stanley's trial was delayed several months. His parents couldn't afford a lawyer. "You don't need a lawyer," his mother said. "Just tell the truth." Stanley told the truth, but perhaps it would have been better if he had lied a little. He could have said he found the shoes in the street. No one believed they fell from the sky. It wasn't destiny, he realized. It was his no good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. There's that line again. The judge called Stanley's crime despicable. The shoes were valued at over $5,000. It was money that would provide food and shelter for the homeless, and you stole that from them just so you could have a souvenir. The judge said that there was an opening at Camp Green Lake, and he suggested that the discipline of the camp might improve Stanley's character. It was either that or jail. Stanley's parents asked if they could have some time to find out more about Camp Green Lake, but the judge advised them to make a decision. Vacancies don't last long at Camp Green Lake. So that does bring us to chapter 7, and that's where we're going to stop for today. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that if you click below, the button will link you to your activity sheet for today. It has activities for chapter 4, chapter 5, and chapter 6. One of them, you even get to design your own shoes for Sweet Feet. So make sure you check that out. And the question that you are asked to answer today is, I want you to pick a character that we've learned about so far, and I want you to describe that character using 3 sentences or more and use their character traits. So you're going to ask me what character traits are, and we have this nice poster to tell us what character traits are. So character traits are words that describe and help us understand a character. So we have our little dude here, and character traits can tell us about the outside of a character, like how he looks. So this part would be his colors. So he's light-skinned, he has brown hair, he's wearing a blue shirt, or brown pants, red shoes, red hat, blue eyes. So you look at a character on the outside. What do they look like? What do they wear? You can look at their age, their race, if they're a girl or a boy. All of those things can be used to describe a character's outside or their looks. Then you have to describe a character on the inside, which this we might not have a lot yet for the inside, because it is what we learn about a character based on what they say, do, think, and feel. So our boy is smart. He is happy at home, but misses his family. He's caring. He likes dogs. So all of those types of things would be learned as we read further into a book or a text. So using one of the characters that we have talked about already, like Stanley, Sweet Feet, Mr. Sir, the warden, Stanley's father, or any of the campers, you're going to try and write 3 sentences that describe the character. And try and use some of those character trait words. Describe how they look, what they wear, and kind of their personality. Are they nice, mean, approachable, gentle, things like that. So those are your challenges for this week over our chapters. And again, if you made it to the end of this video, great job. I can't wait to see your activity sheets and your characterizations. So good luck, guys, and I'll see you for next week's reading.